Sure. So I'm Dean Kennedy. I'm a current resident in Buckinghamshire region or borough, and I am in a L&Q housing building as such. I am also a leaseholder within the property. Been here for, I think it's 9 years now. That seems to have flown by very quickly. But yes, I'm currently a resident in inverted commas with London and Quadrant Housing Trusts.
Brilliant. And so, Dean, you ended up getting the bailiffs in on your landlord, which is quite a turn up because normally it's the landlord sending the bailiffs round to threaten their tenants. So tell us about how did that kind of really extraordinary situation come about?
It's one of those things where you see it on TV. There are plenty of UK TV shows and in America, Repo, whatever it is in the US. I think in the UK it's can't pay, we'll take it away. You always see these things and never think that that will be me one day. Fortunately, I've never had bailiffs come to my door, so I'm quite okay in that regard. But I never thought I'd get to the stage where I'd have to send bailiffs in for a housing association. It seems almost unheard of in the UK. And as you said, it's a very unique story. Going back at least 5 years, L&Q decided to house a very disrespectful, horrible individual next to me. If you can think of an antisocial behaviour issue, they've probably ticked the box. I used to laugh when I used to phone L&Q and say, if you had a bingo card of antisocial behaviour things, you would basically have bingo every time I called in. Um, this had gone on for an extended period of time. We had dealt with violent behavior, threatening behavior towards me, towards other residents. There had been littering, there had been drug dealing, believe it or not. There was an incident which flared up outside my front door between her and her partner. My doorbell at the time had actually caught the entire incident on camera. I was fearful as this was during COVID. They were slamming against my front door, swearing as you can imagine at each other. And I essentially barricaded myself in and called 999, which I have never ever done in my life, to take that type of extent because I just didn't know what was going to happen next. Um, the police turned up, dealt with that issue. The courts were incredibly lenient to the person's partner. They released them with, I think it was like a £300 fine and some community service, and allowed them to go back into the property to, you've guessed it, 3 months later, commit the exact same thing again. So it had just been a turmoil of just ridiculous incidences. Things like 3 o'clock in the morning in the summer, they would go and start their car so that all the fumes would then come up into like our properties and things like that. And you kind of say, well, okay, you could just close your window. Well, in the middle of the summer when it's quite warm, the last thing you want to do is be closing your window. So it's like you're damned if you do, or damned if you don't. So it's like, do I want to stay cool and get exhaust fumes, or do I want to close the window and not breathe it in but be very hot? So it had been a very tumultuous time for me and for the local residents. I then decided to get a petition together that was signed by the local community of, how many people was it at the time? I think it was something like 26 different addresses. And I didn't just do the close proximity. I actually went 2 streets away. Some of the noise coming out of this property was so powerful, it had actually gone 2 streets away. When this was submitted to L&Q, they essentially shrugged their shoulders at the entire thing. They were like, well, unless you've got more evidence and the police get involved and other authorities, this is worth nothing. And I'm going, well, it's not worth nothing because this is not only other Q residents, this is people who are private property owners who are also being affected by your resident. Um, Without going into too much detail, that relationship broke down next door. Everything went quiet and calm for a period, and I thought maybe somebody has changed their ways. I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. And they got into another relationship. Um, Everything was fine. Everything seemed perfect on the outside. I said, perfect, no problem. Everything seems like it's all going back to a normal way. And then slowly the signs would come in, the arguments, the same behavior. They then introduced a dog into the property and they would let it defecate and urinate in the communal areas as well as outside and everywhere else. Um, That then brought on myself and others to report that to the council. The council then obviously sent them a letter informing them of their wrongdoings. And I remember it very clearly. It was in November. I believe it was 2022 when the World Cup was on. And my neighbour decided to throw open her door and say, I won't swear, but some words to the extent of, you effing C, if you report me to the council again, I will cut your effing head off. I promise you that. Not exactly what you want to hear. So, um, obviously, I informed the police. I was absolutely terrified at that point. Um, the strange thing is a lot of people said to me, and again, this is probably more down to society. Well, you're a man. Why should you be scared? And I don't think it matters whether you're a man or a woman or however you identify. If somebody threatens your life, especially with the aggression and the passion as well that somebody can say that with, it leaves a mark. And I then vacated my property and went to go and live with my parents for an extended period of time because I no longer felt safe. The police released her with a charge of a public order offence, which till this day still fascinates me. For those who don't know, a public order offence could be anything from urinating in public to littering, um, threatening someone, littering. Yeah, we won't go down that route. But when I contacted L&Q and informed me, they put together a task force to deal with this. I was then asked, what would I like to have put in place? I said, well, clearly CCTV. You can't be relying on my doorbell to be doing your work. A gated entrance, security, prevention to make sure that these things don't have happen again, regular check-ins, things that most normal people would ask for. And L&Q came back and essentially said, well, we can't put a gated entrance because money reasons, and we can't put CCTV because of money reasons. So I said, well, what's the point of asking me what I want if you can't give me any of what I've asked for? I laugh about it now, but at the time I was, you're kind of you're lost in this cyclone of just, is nobody going to help? Do you not understand the severity of what has happened? And at this point, L&Q were then communicating with the police. They were asking things like, do you feel that Mr. Kennedy is under threat? And the police were like, yes, we do. Something obviously needs to be done. Is he in immediate danger? Well, it depends on your definition of immediate danger. And I'm going, look, I'm not here to sit as an umpire and look at this tennis match going on in emails. I just want you to agree that something needs to be done. Lo and behold, nothing really changed. I then, after an extended period of time, went through therapy, spoke to victims first, and then I had a mental breakdown. I was in my property. My neighbour decided one day to come out of her door and start banging on my door like an absolute animal, threatening to have me, in her words, to quote verbatim, get me done for harassment. Don't know how. Well, I do know how. When I tell you, it will actually make you laugh. I then collapsed in my property. It was the first time I'd ever had a panic attack in my life. I had no idea what was going on. And I dialed 999 and the operator couldn't communicate to me because I'm just sitting there like barely breathing. And I didn't really know what to do. So they were kind of like, well, press buttons if you're still there. And I'm like, yeah, I'm still here. I just can't talk. So eventually they sent someone round. I explained the situation and what happened. They then spoke to my neighbour and said, why are you accusing him of harassment? And they said, well, he keeps collecting evidence with his doorbell. Of course I do, because you're not exactly behaving correctly. And that I was spying on her through her bathroom window. Now, just for context, the bathroom window has frosted glass, and there's another pane of glass before that. The camera on my Ring doorbell, which is a first generation one, for anyone who's wondering, is 720p. Now, as a person who's done photography, in order to get a very clear photo through frosted glass and another pane of glass, you're going to need something pretty sophisticated. So her justification for accusations was unfounded. As such, I said, I'm sure that she accused me of something, whereas I actually have the evidence of her charging over and banging on my door. So the question is, who's harassing who? Anyway, on to other things. My neighbour then decided to set out what I can only say, a war chest of annoyance. She would play music at very unsociable hours. Um, she would purposely let the dog defecate outside my property. The property then decided to get the wise idea of having a cat. The cat would bring back mice. They would then leave the mice outside my property. Um, Italian mafia normally use horses' heads. They decided to use mice. You use what you can get. Um, Again, it's very fickle things. But then it started to turn more aggressive, where they would walk past my door, stick their middle fingers up, make remarks. Walk to my front door and put their ear against the door to see if I'm actually in and things like that, which is very unnerving for anyone who's in an anxiety state, to then have people coming to your door and listening in to see if you're in your property. Um, Eventually, after periods of time of constantly reporting this to L&Q and the Noise app, which at the time I was using Noise app version 1. Now, why does that ring a bell for some people? Well, version 1 does not record the location of where the noise comes from. However, you could take any smartphone from the past 10 years and use the inbuilt voice recording app, and it will pinpoint your location of where you're recording. Why is this important? Because when L&Q originally tried to take my neighbour to court, the solicitor said all of these noise recordings can't be used because we can't geolocate where the noise is coming from, and, and would be thrown out. So I had something like, I don't know, 140 recordings in this version 1 of their app, and none of it could be used in court. And as such, L&Q went, can't do nothing. And I went, cool. All of a sudden, I make a massive complaint, and version 2 of the Noise app comes out. And guess what? It's got included. Yep, geotagging on the recordings. So after that, there had been a multitude of different issues that had arisen. Obviously, my health started to decline with living in constant fear. I didn't really go outside, even though I've got a small garden. My garden backs onto their back windows, and the one time I went out there, they basically spent 10 minutes just staring at me, hurling abuse. So I was essentially trapped in a prison that I was paying for with a mortgage, something that I wouldn't wish on anybody. I then decided enough was enough after talking to, blimey, how many was it? Must have been at least 13, 14 individuals at L&Q, emailing Fiona Fletcher Smith, only to be met with her, I think, secretary, who was like, oh, it's really nice you've emailed in, but maybe we should talk about it. Yeah, we should. We should talk about this consistent failure of your entire department. I then had a chat with some apparent very high ups in L&Q who were incredibly unsympathetic to my situation and offered, we'll keep monitoring the situation. That doesn't really help if you're not actually going to put anything in place to monitor it. The other thing I should mention is that there was a back and forward between myself and L&Q around my Ring doorbell. Now, the neighbouring question had suggested that the video footage that I was sending over was filming into their property. And if the front door was open, that fact is true. They then spoke to the Information Commissioner's office, who then gave L&Q, allegedly, a bunch of feedback to give to me, which were things like you need to add black banding to the door, the camera shouldn't be facing their door, you shouldn't be recording, you shouldn't be, what was it? You shouldn't be recording anything in the hallway, I shouldn't be doing this, I shouldn't be doing that. And I said, hang on a minute, I've submitted so much footage to you, and only now you decide to come up with this. Plus, Thames Valley Police had taken multiple amounts of hours of footage, one of which saved my neighbour's life and also her ex-partner's life after they were battering each other. And yet now the entire tables had been turned on me, like I was the problem. So I then reached out to the ICO myself and spoke to someone. I said, how can this be possible? I said, this is the only defence I've got. So considering the housing association refused to put any safeguarding in place, refused to put any CCTV, and refused to put any gated entrances. Anybody can come up here. And they said, well, if the police used the evidence before. I said, yeah. They said, well, if it's your only evident part that you've got that you can actually submit to the police and use that as your as your security measure, then we have no problem with that. As long as you're not keeping it and using it for all alternative measures or uploading it into social media, you're fine. I said, okay, cool. So I haven't told L&Q this, but all I've done is added the black banding, and I actually added a bracket to my camera that actually turns it 45 degrees just slightly out of shot. But they're still not happy, that they still are the what's the word, hung up about the camera. And I'm going, well, surely the fix is to put your own CCTV in. Into which I was then met with, yeah, but if we do that, then maybe we're breaking our own rules because we'll be filming in an area. And I'm like, well, which team are you going to sit on? You know, I pay my bills. I've not missed any service charge issues, and yet you've got this. You know, I can't even describe them as a human because they're so far from being, you know, empathetic to anybody in the local community. A resident that literally destroyed an entire community. So, just to give you a quick overview of everything, we had a very bad antisocial person who had pretty much destroyed my life. I got to a stage where I was self-harming. I wasn't eating. I had to go into therapy. I had to leave my property. I then started to talk to other residents in the area who had had verbal fracas with this person, allowing their dog to defecate on their property, the noise disturbance and everything else. I have a written letter by somebody who used to live in the area. They specifically moved because of my neighbour. And the reason why they moved, and it's quite disgusting to say, the property's garden is actually facing the main road. It's a very strange design. Her and her partner would how can I word this? Actively make love in their garden, and if you're at the top row of houses, you could basically see straight into that garden. During COVID, a lady who, or this particular lady who lived across the street, was working for the NHS and had to physically move her office from there to the back of the house to prevent anyone from being able to hear such actions taking place. Also, you would have people who were walking their children or, you know, taking their grandchildren out and walk past the garden and go, oh, that's not what I want to see at 11:30 in the afternoon. You know, it was just it was small amounts of chaos that would just grow and grow and grow to the point where you're going, this is some sort of fever dream. Like I'm going to wake up from this eventually. So then I said, right, L&Q clearly don't want to do nothing. I'm now going to force their hand. So I said, how can I do this? The best way to do it is hit them with the paperwork so that they can't run from it. I then went through their procedures, which for anyone who has raised a complaint against L&Q is farcical, shall we say? So we got to a stage one and they responded with something along the lines of, oh, but we followed all our procedures. I don't see why there's a problem. We're monitoring everything. My response was, but you're not. This is the point. I'm doing all the hard work. You guys are actively doing nothing to support us in the local community, or the police, or the council, or anyone else. So I then got to a stage two, and I then had a call with a representative from L&Q's complaints team, who I'm sure is incredibly busy. So I must have been very lucky that day to have someone to talk to. They were telling me, well, there's certain things that fall under other people's jurisdictions and so on and so forth. And I said, hang on a minute, are you trying to pass the blame? And they said, well, we're not passing the blame, but there are certain things that fall on certain people's responsibilities. And I said, huh, okay, interesting. So they said, do you want to take this to a final stage? And I said, yeah, because clearly we're not getting anywhere on this call. At the same time, I then contacted the council and raised what's called a community trigger, which essentially brings all the services together. So that's the social housing, the council, police, and any other services, can even be the MP, which I've done on multiple occasions. I joined that meeting, and to say that I embarrassed quite a few individuals on that call would be fair to say. One thing that came out of that is they had many calls and meetings about this particular issue in the area, but quite clearly nobody was talking to each other. So it just shows that L&Q, for once, were correct. But again, we're not leading the charge in actively fixing this situation. So what would happen is the police would say, we can only go so far. We need evidence from X. X would then say, well, we actually need Y to do their job before Z can do theirs. And then Z would go, well, hang on a minute. I thought you guys would do. So I don't know if you've ever seen the meme of Spider-Man and there's like three of them and they're all pointing at each other. It was like that. It was like a room of people just pointing at each other going, but it's you who spoke. But no. That's not what we're here to do. So the council now have set up a task force off the back of this, which actively pulls people together, which actually did help because when we got to a stage four, the final stage, L&Q were like, well, we've now taken part in this task force and we're making progress. And I said, okay, can you give me a timeline and a breakdown of when all this is going to be resolved? No, that doesn't help then, does it? Because all you've done is set up a group and given yourself all a high five saying this is cool, but never actually done anything. So they said, well, what we can do for the what was it? For the issues that you've incurred, and the things that you've been through, we can give you a payment of £140. Which, to be honest, I wish they didn't say it because it was more of an insult. And it was actually the blue touch paper that got lit for everything that I'm about to go into now. I then contacted the Housing Ombudsman and said, essentially, I've never been so insulted in my life to have £140 offered to me for 5 years worth of antisocial behaviour issues and trying to lead a task force and herding people who are getting paid a lot more than I am to do their job. Now, the Ombudsman were quite shocked when I explained the entire process and the failures that had gone on. One other key point I should also mention is that I think it was the first 2.5 years of reports that I had sent to L&Q just went into thin air. That was according to Housing Ombudsman when they went back and said, so Mr. Kennedy sent this email. Where's all the documentation here? And L&Q went, I don't know. So yeah, it just shows that keeping your emails is a very powerful thing, which is a stickler for what I am. I keep emails from many moons ago, which is probably really bad, but in this case actually paid dividend. But yeah, it was astonishing that after 6 months, the Ombudsman came back and said, which to be honest took far too long in my opinion, but we got there in the end, was astonishing the levels of failure of maladministration. Now, the scary point here is that this isn't like a first time that L&Q had committed this type of maladministration, especially around antisocial behaviour. Just through a quick Google, this is before ChatGPT even became a thing, the amount of articles that I'd found by the Housing Ombudsman stating the exact same thing is eye-watering. In short, the Housing Ombudsman offered me £800 in damages, and this was specifically just for the misadministration by L&Q. Now, you could say, well, that's £800, good on you, yay. Still doesn't pay my mortgage for a month, which is one thing to think about. And it doesn't really rectify the damages. And I think the important thing here is that sometimes it's not about the money. It's about making sure that what someone has failed in does not happen again. Quite clearly, I am one in X who have had the exact same thing. So, the Ombudsman do have things written in the statements that they put that say, L&Q within a month must achieve the, correct amount of procedures and follow this and this, which is fine because they may do that for a month, but then it just completely falls off a cliff and then the whole cycle starts again. I've actually written to my local MP to ask the housing ministry that something needs to be changed here because clearly the Ombudsman are happy to fine housing associations or anyone who's within housing a nominal fee, but it's not enough, in my opinion. £800 to an organisation like L&Q when I've gone through 5 years of hell just doesn't add up. I would much rather have actually had the £800 go into the community or something like that. In fact, I did actually give a portion of it back to charity because it just seemed like the right thing to do. Um, Coming into kind of how the rest of it then happened, I said, well, if I've won this off the back of failings by L&Q, that kind of gives me half a foot in to actually say, well, what about the mortgage payments I was making when I wasn't living at property? What about the year's worth of medication I had to buy for anxiety and low mood? What about, the loss of earnings, the fact that I was self-harming, the therapy and all the other fees? So I went on YouTube. I started looking at how to take someone to a small claims court because I'd never done it before, and I found a wonderful video. Um, I'm trying to remember the name of the guy. I think it's something like is it the martial arts solicitor or something like that? I'll find the exact name. As you can guess, he does martial arts and he happens to be a solicitor as well. And he kind of explained the entire process, and I was going, okay, well, let's try it. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? They say no. So, for anyone who doesn't know, the money claim portal is run by the government. You fill in your details and you have to pay a fee towards the courts, which is based on the amount of money that you're going for, which, to be honest, is actually quite acceptable depending on what you're going for. If you start to go into the six figures, then yeah, you start coughing up some serious money. But for anything below that, it's an acceptable fee. You go in, you put all your nominations, you put all your evidence, you put the amount of money that you require, and off it goes. And it goes through the entire legal system. The interesting point is I was fully expecting L&Q, this big powerhouse, to have this exciting legal team. We will fight, we do everything by the book according to their website and everyone I've spoken to. Lo and behold, after it went to court, no one from L&Q turned up. So I defaulted the actual victory because no one at L&Q decided to turn up in court, which absolutely blew me away. Now, you may say, well, they never got the letter, Dean. Of course they wouldn't turn up in court. They had received 3 letters. Now, organizations like that would normally have a pretty sophisticated setup. Letters go in, they get filed, they get put into the right departments. You would think that. And I will explain why in a moment. I was then asked, do you want to go ahead and submit the paperwork to L&Q in order to request a payment? I said, of course. That went by for a month. 2 months pass, and then the system automatically says to you, would you like this to go over to enforcement, which is what we would call bailiffs? And I said, yes, I would. Now, this is where things get a little bit interesting. So county court bailiffs are not high court enforcement bailiffs, and I'll explain the difference between the two in a moment. County court bailiffs visited L&Q, and the warrant had been out, or the warrant of control, which is essentially a piece of paper to say you owe X, Y money, was issued in November. The bailiffs went out in December the 24th, which for you and me is Christmas Eve, and the building was shut. No surprise. Now, I said, okay, that's fine. When are you going again? And they said, well, once we get the new year out of the way, we'll go. Perfect. No problems. New year, this year, comes around. And yeah, they never went back. And I phoned the courts. I tried to phone the bailiffs, which would ring into the abyss of nothing, and no one would answer the phone. So after constantly emailing and constantly phoning in and then constantly phoning a hotline to be met with, oh, you just have to wait. I said, since November? That seems an awful lot of time. Are they that busy? So I got to, what are we now? August. I got to the start of April and said, something has got to change here. Like this is ridiculous. So I had sent a email to a few different private agencies, and this is where the High Court enforcement officers come in. A couple of them came back and said, not really our thing. And then one of them came back, which was called the Sheriff's Office, and they said, yeah, we'll take it. No problems at all. Now, again, I hadn't been through this process myself. I was kind of learning as I was going. The Sheriff's Office took the warrant off me and said, right, we'll go and process it in the High Court for you. And then once we get that writ of control, we're good to go. Unfortunately, I had a delay of about a month because the existing warrant of control from the county court needed to be taken back before they could then issue the new warrant. And I said, oh, right, okay. So that then meant that I had to try and contact the courts and the bailiffs to get that paperwork taken away. And as you've heard previously, getting hold of them is like finding Moses in a burning bush. Not easy. In the end, I contacted Her Majesty's Ministry of Justice, or His Majesty, sorry. Sorry, I still like the Queen. I do miss her. Yes, His Royal Highness's Ministry of Justice. And I put in a complaint. I said, look, I've been contacting them for a matter of months. I'm not getting any contact back. Something is clearly wrong. 2 days later, I get an email and a letter going, yeah, sure, Mr. Kennedy, we can strike that off straight away. It's funny that, isn't it? So now I had that completed, I said, okay, went back to the guys and gave them the evidence. They went to the High Court and requested the writ of control, and they said, yeah, no problems at all. Now, if anybody's watched the particular TV show that I mentioned earlier, you would know damn well that they love to put fees on top. Before I sent the High Court bailiffs in, I contacted L&Q's legal department, and I'm going to read you an email verbatim. I will skip through some of the things that I have written, and then I'll explain exactly what L&Q said. So I had essentially said, I'm requesting payment. The county court warrant of control has been issued by a particular court. This has been outstanding for a particular months. If you don't pay the balance, I will then send High Court officers in, so on and so forth. Sent all the evidence, and this went to L&Q's Head of Legal Services Governance and Transformation Department. I was then met with an email, and I will read it verbatim. Dear Mr. Kennedy, thank you for your email and voicemail. So I did leave a voicemail as well. I wasn't aware of this situation until yesterday, and I'm currently trying to establish what had happened. I will come back to you shortly. Do you think he came back to me? Of course he did. So I then said, okay, fine, no problems. I then left one final voicemail and I said, if you keep ignoring me, I will do it. They ignored me and I did it. And I phoned up the guys and I said, right, go and do it, go and execute it. How that execution works is they send a letter to L&Q, which then adds an extra charge on what I had already won from court. That then gives them a week to pay. If they don't pay in a week, then they will assign it to an agent. That agent will then visit the property, and they will then start what they call stage one. Stage one is, we've now had to come out. You now incur more fines. If you don't pay within a set time, we then go to stage two, which then means that we could potentially start seizing items in the property. Unfortunately, it didn't get to stage two. I kind of would have liked that, just to see chairs and tables and stuff being moved out of the L&Q office would have been quite hilarious. But Monday that has just gone this week, an agent attended the property at L&Q. So somebody at their reception would have received a lovely set of gentlemen walking through their door with High Court enforcement written on their back, which I'm sure was incredibly embarrassing for them. The guy put the piece of paper on the table, and I know all this because I've had it read back to me verbatim from the team. The secretary couldn't believe what was going on and said, you have 24 hours to pay this or the fee goes up by X amount. I won't tell you what the X amount is, but it was quite eye-watering. The next day, someone from their department phoned the officers and said, well, we need to pay this, so do you have the bank details? And the amount was paid. Now, I had contacted L&Q's legal department to pay the exact fee as it was written. Because of their negligence and the fact that they thought that this was going away, L&Q had to pay an extra £1,800 on top of what was already owed. So because he couldn't be bothered to answer me, they ended up paying more money. So as it stands right now, I have a 2-week wait, which is legally bound, in case L&Q do want to contest it, which, to be honest, they can't really. And I will be getting my money. And that is how I took L&Q to court, went through a whole process, and sent the bailiffs on people who are used to sending bailiffs for their tenants.
I mean, it's just an incredible story. What strikes me most, I think, is that so many people will absolutely identify with that inability to enforce or difficulty enforcing their legal rights. I think most people just wouldn't kind of even necessarily think of going to the extent that
Mm.
you did. So where people have been ordered to receive compensation, like you were for antisocial behaviour or
Mm.
disrepairs, or it could be that they've overpaid their service charges and they want to get a refund. There is this massive enforcement gap, isn't there? The courts can order something, but L&Q, and to be honest, they are just not unique at all in
No,
this. If we ignore this person, they don't have a lot of power, they're going to go away. And what you've shown is that you do actually have power. You can bring the bailiffs in yourself and
absolutely.
get that money, whether it's a refund, as long as it's legitimately incurred by you, you can get that money. So I think it's a very, very inspiring story. I mean, as well as being horrific because of
Mm.
all that devastation that you've suffered. And I think it kind of resonates with a lot of campaigns that SHAC is running, because obviously we're doing stuff around antisocial behaviour, but we are also looking to set, for some system whereby, for example, disputed service charge payments can be paid to the court and not to the landlord, so that if it is due to be refunded because you've overpaid, that can go straight back to the tenant or resident. It's not sitting in L&Q or anybody else's coffers and you have to reclaim it. So I think it has just so much kind of resonance with so many different aspects that
Mm.
people struggle with, which is basically the unaccountability of these landlords, isn't it?
I totally agree. I think one of the key things with me is some people would say to me, "Well, Dean, why didn't you just sell up and leave? That's not exactly something you can just do overnight. Why don't you just go and rent something else?" Well, I'm paying the mortgage for a property. I should be entitled to live in it safely.
Mm.
So then you say to yourself, well, if I've exhausted all available resources that are available to me, fine. I'll sell the property, I'll go, I'll leave, fine. That in my mind, and again, I don't know if it's just the type of person I am, is defeatist. And I would have been less inclined to go down this route if L&Q were working with me, being very sympathetic to the situation, were assisting me, giving me encouragement to feel safe in my own home. But when the tables were being turned and I was almost being made to be the perpetrator in all of this and made to be the bad person, you kind of say, well, hang on a minute, there's something fundamentally wrong here. And as you quite rightly said, I think there's a very big knowledge gap, especially when it comes to the law, what you are entitled to, what you're not entitled to. And through the powers of social media and YouTube and just going off and doing my own research, you would be surprised the wealth of knowledge that you can get out of AI these days as well if you type in the right prompts. Um, which, funny enough, is actually how I found out about escalating it to the high court authorities, was actually through ChatGPT. I wrote the entire thing out and said, "What can I do with UK law?" And it said, "Go to high court enforcement." So I did. Um, but yeah, I totally agree. It is very empowering for myself to know that these organizations can be held accountable if you go through the right channels. And the important things that I will or I have taken away is paperwork is key, having an evidence trail is key, and follow the process because as it stands right now, there is a 2 week period where somebody could challenge something. To kind of deviate how that particular part works is, for instance, say, I don't know, you owned a debt, the bailiffs turned up, they repossessed your car to offset that payment. If you can prove either that car wasn't yours or the debt isn't correct, that 14-day window when that amount is being held, in my case, that money, if they L&Q could come back and say, we don't owe that money, then obviously those funds would then be going back to L&Q, or that car in that scenario would then come back. However, in my scenario, because my my evidence and the amount of processes I've gone through of going through the court, winning the case, which L&Q can't really distribute now, dispute, sorry, can't dispute now. Um, all of the things that I've gone through, the fact that it's gone to the bailiffs, it then came back from the bailiffs, it then went to the High Court bailiffs. They can't get out of this. The money essentially is mine. Um, but I think the important thing is sometimes it's not necessarily about the money, it's standing up for yourself. I am one man in a flat. how many people and how big is an organization of L&Q, the fact that little old me has managed to send high court enforcement into their building must have been embarrassing for them. And I would highly, highly, highly encourage others to do it, because unless we're going to stand here and hold these organizations accountable, whether it be through the amazing work that SHAC do, whether it's through getting funds back through high court enforcement, or just protesting and standing up for what we believe in, things will never change. And I hope that my story, if we can call it that, will lead to others taking that same approach. Because I think, if judging by the lack of legal awareness at L&Q, if we then ended up with, I don't know, 100 people that went through the exact same thing that I did, I think L&Q would have a serious problem on their hands to be able to do this. And it's not just L&Q, it's all housing associations, right? I think that's an important thing to remember. And that's one thing that drove me along, is I almost felt like I wasn't doing this for me, but for others, to open that door, to prove to people that it is possible to actually achieve this end result. And let's be honest, embarrass these individuals into exposing how awful their organizations are, and how poor their communications can be, even when it comes to receiving legal documentation.
I'm sure it will inspire lots and lots of other people. I mean, I can't tell you how grateful we are that you are sharing your story with us, because I think that that sense of empowerment, like you say, whatever route you take, whether it's kind of collectively organizing, or doing what you did, or as you say, organizing a protest, whatever route you go down, the fact that you can win at the end of it, I think, is something that gets very little publicity.
Mm.
The media generally likes to present people as the helpless victims, and you've shown that that isn't the case. We can win. Obviously, we are agitating for fundamental changes, but we
Yes.
can win along the way. And I think that is very, very inspiring and very important to remember. So thank you so much, Dean. What a fantastic story to share with us. And we look forward to sharing it with our members.
No,
Thank you.
absolutely. I appreciate it. And I think in closing, I think the one takeaway is that I was very grateful to have SHAC kind of surrounding me. I'd kept you guys up to date with what was going on. I think the other key takeaway is, as much as there can be a lot of darkness that can appear through what people have gone through, I have gone through a hell of amount of stuff with antisocial behaviour. It's only one portion of this entire demographic. And I think the one thing to remember is, it doesn't matter if it's 1 or 50 or 100
Yeah.
or 150. If you have the right dedication and the right focus, you can achieve anything. I think that's an important thing to take away.